Good evening, everybody. Good evening, parents, carers, and members of the Forest community, and welcome to our Forest Focus webinar this evening on the theme of assessment and reporting at Forest School. As always, we're not expecting any technical difficulties, but please do bear with us if we do encounter any problems. Please do also join us on Thursday this week, the 30th of November, for our webinar on I Wish I'd Known, a workshop for parents and carers on young people, drugs and decisions. If you could be kind enough to also please complete our feedback survey at the end of this presentation. We're always looking at improving the flow, the format of these sessions. That would be absolutely fantastic. It will be displayed as a QR code once I finish this evening at the end of the webinar. This is also an opportunity to ask any follow-up questions that you might have about assessment and reporting at Forest, and of course to be engaged in that constant dialogue with us. I'm also displaying my email address, which I'm sure many of you have access to already. If you do have specific queries or comments following this webinar about assessment, reporting, or any other academic matters. And just by way of introduction to those of you that don't know me, I'm Mr. Key. I'm the Deputy Head Academic at Forest. So I oversee all teaching and learning, all curriculum, and all academic matters from year 7 through to year 13 in the senior school. And today's session is very much about our assessment and reporting structures. It's designed to be quite holistic. It is quite information heavy. Just to be really clear, when pupils receive their reports at Forest School, parents will also be issued with an instructive guidance document, which will contain much of this information to help you easily digest and process the report in the best possible way. So don't feel as though you need to take everything in, take lots of notes or anything like that. Obviously, you can revisit this session. It will be stored on our YouTube channel. But in addition, there is a guidance document to support. So the agenda for this evening is as follows. I want to set out the rationale for why we've made some amendments, some tweaks, and some evolutionary steps with our reform of reporting and assessment at Forest. I also want to introduce you to the team of people that work with the young people at Forest School to ensure that they make best progress and that they develop academically, as well as pastorally and in terms of their personal development. I want to outline our system of common departmental assessments, which are ongoing, frequent assessments of pupils' academic progress. I also want to set out what the report looks like, what it includes, when to expect them. And I want to speak a little bit more about pupil academic monitoring. Many of you will know that we've engaged in a new system of academic monitoring, and we trialled our first on that new format last Tuesday, and we're gathering feedback on that process from pupils, from teachers as well. We look to continuously refine how we do that academic monitoring. And finally, I've compiled some frequently asked questions that have come to me through parental engagement so far with the new reporting system, questions that I've received directly from members of the Forest community, from pupils as well. And I hope that may answer a few of the questions preemptively that you may have that may not be covered by some of the things that I'm going to discuss in the previous sections. So just to kind of explain why we have decided to make some incremental changes to our reform, to our reporting and assessment systems, we felt that the old system by which we issued grades home and grades from year 7 all the way through to year 13, largely expressed as GCSE outcome grades 9 to 1, didn't really provide much in the way of clarity as to what that means about pupil progress in terms of what they need to work on, what they need to develop. Oftentimes, that data was literally just presented in a quantifiable format. So you would receive a grade 5 in art in year 7 without really any extrapolation of what that means in context, what that means in terms of their areas of development, what that means in terms of their deficiencies, and what that means in terms of their strengths in the subject. We obviously also know that assigning GCSE outcome grades at specific junctures in the educational journey, particularly in years 7, 8, and 9, isn't particularly helpful, given those grades are a complete extrapolation. They are not externally assessed, strong, kind of externally determined grades They are more holistic teacher assessments expressed in a language that some of you will be au fait with, that language of 9 to 1. But of course, parents had very legitimate follow-up questions under that old system regarding the trajectory of student development and progress. So is a grade 5 in geography in year 8 in any way equivalent to a grade 5 in geography in year 11? And the answer to that is no, it's not, because the assessment criteria at those levels differs absolutely differently. The stage of the curriculum and their progress through the curriculum is completely different. And of course, our internal assessments are not the same as external GCSE assessments. They're not subject to necessarily the same level of benchmarking against other schools. Ultimately, final grades in year 11 and year 13, once they've gone through the process of the examining boards marking them, are then subject to bell curves. They look at national performance, and they look holistically at all of the parts, all of the components of that assessment. And that could be 2 examination papers, for example, and a piece of coursework. So to say that an assessment grade in year 7 was somehow equivalent to an assessment grade in year 11 was at best a bit of an extrapolation, and at worst quite misleading. So we're trying to avoid those false equivalencies going forward as far as possible. We also felt very strongly, based on our own assessment of pupil well-being, based on their feedback, based on things we heard in pupil leadership, but also based on rich evidence-based studies from lots of contexts, that the saturation of grading, particularly in those lower year groups, year 7, 8, and 9, was not particularly helpful for pupils' own mental health, for their own anxieties, for their own understanding of their progress, and particularly as they were being presented in this decontextualized format without really any appending comment in terms of what they need to do to develop and progress. Obviously, they're having those conversations in lessons, but that's not necessarily the dialogue that the report is engaging in. So those are some of the underlying reasons for why we have decided to change the system, to tweak it. And I hope today's session will shed some light on what that now looks like. And hopefully you will see it as a strengthening of our provision. But it is really important for me to make clear that no assessment and no reporting system is perfect. We're constantly looking to refine it. We're constantly looking for pupil feedback, parental feedback, teacher feedback. And of course, we're constantly looking at developments in the field of assessment, in the field of reporting from our partners in universities, from the pedagogical research. So we will be constantly refining this system, and we will be looking for feedback from all parties. So I just wanted to start off by setting that out. So in terms of what was wrong with the old grading system, I've really kind of, I've explained that already, but just to be clear, we believe strongly that it was encouraging, particularly in our younger students, a bit of an obsession with grading and some anxiety. There was too much emphasis on grades, and there was perhaps less of a focus on developmental feedback, the actionable formative steps that pupils needed to take to progress and develop in their subject. We also felt that they presented little clarity on what the grades signified, and that's actually equally as true in year 10 and year 12, but we've taken a slightly different approach with those year groups. And then, of course, there are also questions about equivalency. Does a grade 7 in English is it equivalent in any way to a grade 7 in geography? And again, the answer to that is not really, because different curriculum pathways are formatted in different ways. Different skills are acquired at different junctures in different subjects. So that equivalency was very difficult to articulate in a system with no benchmarking externally. And of course, as everybody knows here, there is no external assessment for pupils in year 7 for year 8 and year 9. There is no SAT. There is no mini GCSE. There isn't a level 1 qualification that we subscribe to. So it's not really until we've gone through the process of sitting all of those components of the GCSE and A-level that we can have any certainty with what a grade signifies. Now, does that mean that we're doing away with grades entirely? Absolutely not. In some ways, grades are useful signifiers. They give us something concrete to post progress against. And in those year groups where there is grade equivalency, year 10, year 11, year 12, and year 13, we will still be using grading nomenclature. but hopefully we'll be providing even more information to help parents, carers, and pupils really understand what that grade means in context. And I also just want to spend a little bit of time sketching out the team behind all of this. I wanted to really take some time to introduce who our academic leadership team is. So obviously I'm the deputy head academic. I lead the team, I chair the team, but with me I also have lots of individuals involved who encompass support for pupils at all the different sectional levels of the school. Equivalent to my oversight of the entire school, we also have Miss Wright, who many of you will know as our head of learning support. For the last 3 years, she's also been our director of academic progress. So her work has very much involved macro level data analysis, looking at pupil progress, having conversations with heads of department and teachers, and intervening early in those instances of regression, in those instances where pupils aren't making the expected progress that we would want them to make. And that actually doesn't just mean pupils that are achieving relatively low scores in assessments. It also means those pupils that aren't reaching their potential. I'm going to speak a little bit more about how we know that and the benchmarking procedures that we use to kind of ascertain a pupil's flight path. In addition to myself and Miss Wright, we also have our heads of section, who I'm sure you will have had contact with. You know who they are. Mr. Sloan in the lower school, Miss Letchmere Smith in the middle school, so year 9, year 10 and 11, and Kate Spencer-Ellis, Miss Spencer-Ellis in the sixth form, year 12 and 13. And for the last 2.5 years, they have been ably supported by a new position, relatively new position at Forest School, the Deputy Head of Section, Academic Enrichment and Progress. And these new roles have been created to provide even more capacity to have those early intervention conversations, to spot pupil progress concerns, to chivvy along pupils and provide them and equip them with the skills, the study habits, the dispositions that they need to be very successful Forest learners. And in that sense, you probably met these individuals at parent engagement events, but we have Phil Peters, Mr. Peters, who's also a physics teacher. In the lower school, we have Miss Mackey in the middle school, who is also our head of religious studies and philosophy. And in the sixth form, we have Mr. Sage, who's also a history teacher. And these individuals will be working very closely with pupils on a one-to-one basis, sometimes in small groups. And they're predominantly working with pupils that we have identified as an academic leadership team who are perhaps not progressing at the rate that we want them to progress at. They've perhaps performed to a lower standard in their common departmental assessments. It might be that their full CAS grades are a bit low, or it could be that they're just not reaching their potential. It might be that they are a student that we know is capable of achieving the very highest grade, for example, in the sixth form, an A star, but they may be working at a grade A or a grade B. The purpose of these individuals is to actualize that support, to get in very early, to work with the pupil, to diagnose what the issue is, to obviously be a conduit with myself and the other members of the academic leadership team, with our heads of department, with our teachers, and indeed actually to get on the phone to parents as well, very early, so that it's not when the report comes in that suddenly intervention is happening, issues are raised, concerns are being flagged, and things are being responded to. It's actually an approach which begins from the very first assessment date in September and is all ongoing throughout the academic year. So the idea of the academic leadership team is to provide that capacity, that wraparound support, but also to be a central point of focus for those pupils, for progress, and also to be a conduit between teachers, tutors, heads of house, heads of department, and to provide them with the data and the understanding that they need to understand the progress of pupils in their care. So what I want to be really clear about is the academic leadership team is working very closely with our very well-established pastoral systems. You will know your child's tutor, you will know their head of house. This is the back-end team that's working really closely with those individuals to ensure that they have everything at their fingertips that they need to understand the progress of those pupils. And I also just wanted to spend a little bit of time sketching out what assessment looks like at Forest. At the top level, the macro level, we have what we call ongoing low stakes formative assessment. And even though this is low stakes, I would argue this is the most important form of assessment that happens at Forest. This is the quotidian, day in, day out, lesson by lesson, minute by minute feedback that is being provided to pupils to ensure that they make progress. These are the interactions between pupils and teachers when teachers spot misconceptions in the classroom, when they circulate and assist, when they spot deficiencies with homework, when they're correcting incorrect answers, when they're challenging through questioning, when they're engaging with pop quizzes and what we call retrieval practice, deliberate practice of past material, their knowledge and fact-checking. It might be in the form of a vocabulary quiz. Those of you that remember studying for your MFL, your French, your German, your Spanish, etc., those kind of ongoing formative assessment pieces that you were engaged with to help build your vocabulary banks. In maths, it could be a problem sheet. In physics, obviously essays. In English and history. That's the kind of assessment that we're talking about at this macro level. For me, for all teachers, this is the most important part of assessment. It gives us the constant data that we need to understand where our pupils are, where they need to go, and how to close the gap. And all of the evidence-based assessments suggest that that formative assessment is the thing that we have to get right. The next layer up from that formative assessment is our common departmental assessment, which is a once per half term formalized assessment. And actually that could take several forms depending on the curriculum need of the department at that time. So it could be, for example, in Lent 1, pupils have been working on the First World War. They've been examining the causes of the First World War, and they're now asked to present back, either through a viva or through a pupil-led presentation, an assessment of what was the main cause of the First World War. And they'll be building up to this over the course of several weeks or several lessons, and that will culminate in a final assessment. It could be an essay, it could be a knowledge quiz, it could be, as I've already alluded to, an assessment of oracy, a viva, an instrumental task in music, a presentation. It can take many forms, but the key thing is that this is a longer, more formal piece of work set by the department, and it's common to all pupils within that department, within that year group. That gives us the ability to standardize, gives us the ability to formally check for data, for progress. And it's at this stage that we're asking teachers to submit evidence, data, to us, the academic leadership team, so that we can chart and track the progress of pupils. In the past, we used to send out those common departmental assessments to parents, but that's where we started running into issues in terms of the comparability of grades, the saturation of grading. And it meant that back in the day, we would send out 5, 6 pieces of uncontextualized data a year to parents. And quite often, I think we found that that actually hindered more than it helped. It meant that actually there was this huge grade fixation. There wasn't necessarily the same focus on progression. There wasn't really the same focus on what they needed to do to support. But what I absolutely want to reassure parents is that these common departmental assessments are still occurring. We are still capturing the data, and we can share that information, of course, and we do share that information when things are flagged as a concern. When the academic leadership team, which meets weekly, has found that there are issues with pupil progress, that pupils are regressing, that they're not reaching their potential, it's at that stage that we start to share, we start to articulate what the issues are. We have roundtable discussions with parents and carers. We bring in the tutor, we bring in the head of house. So we are still capturing that data. We're just not formally expressing it to parents every single half term for what I think are very, very valid reasons. Some of you may disagree with that approach. I'm really eager to chat to people about that approach. The evidence suggests that it is the right approach, so long as we can ensure that those earliest interventions are still happening. And I have full confidence that they are. The other layer here is academic review. And this is what we mean when we talk about academic monitoring. And I'm going to turn to what that is a bit later in today's presentation. We also have some other very formal measures of progress. we have an interim report, and we have an end of year report. These are the formalized things which go home. This is the collation of all of the evidence of the common departmental assessments. So that will be sent home in time, just not every half term. And it's a much more holistic report. It will include lots of data points, and I'm going to explain what they are. And I hope actually you will see that they are richer than our previous reports have been over the last 5 to 10 years. They include more data points. They include more useful information that will enable those conversations about progress and development to occur. There are also some other assessment points. So at the beginning of the year for pupils in year 7 and for pupils in year 9 and for pupils in year 12, they set what we call a MIDIUS or an ALICE test, a baseline test. And these are really intelligent tests that are formulated by the Centre of Evaluation and Monitoring out of Cambridge University. And the idea is to provide pupils with a really robust assessment of lots of different skills that we know are pertinent for academic development and progress and outcomes. So pupils are tested on their literacy, their numeracy, their verbal skills, their non-verbal skills, their linear thinking, they're asked to problem solve. There's a lot of pattern recognition. It's, in a sense, quite a simplistic IQ test, but there are lots of other elements to this which are really interesting. And this has come out of about 4 decades worth of research, originally from Durham University, but now being co-opted by Cambridge University. And what this assessment will do is it will compare pupils' performance in that assessment in very standardized conditions. They all sit it at the same time on the same day with actually lots of other data. So they'll look, for example, at relative cohort data from their postcode. They'll look at the outcomes of similar pupils with similar socioeconomic profiles. They'll look at the outcome of pupils that have gone to similar primary schools. So it's a really authoritative test. And we don't use that to put a ceiling on the pupils or to say, right, this is what this magical algorithmic assessment of who you are, this monolithic kind of mega data structure says. We actually just use it as a guide to how well those pupils should be progressing. Often we see that pupils outperform. And in fact, at a school like Forest, the majority of our pupils outperform what the baseline test suggests. That's what we should expect pupils to progress and get. But actually, the vast majority of our pupils do better. And I think that's testament to the quality of our teaching and learning. I think it's testament to the hard work of our pupils, but also these systems that support our pupils. And of course, the support of our parent and carer body too, who are vital in the academic progression of pupils. The other parts that we have of our assessment and reporting structure at Forest are standardized mock examinations for pupils in exam year groups in year 11 and 13. In year 13, pupils actually sit 2 tranches of mock examinations, 1 tranche in January, 1 tranche in April. And that final April one is their last shot before their final linear A-levels. So all pupils in year 11 and 13 are given a really, really developed experience of those exams. And those exams are sat just like the real thing, same conditions in the exam hall, same regulations, same rules. Down to the see-through pencil cases that I'm sure you all remember, the same instructions about malpractice. The idea here is to give them a really robust feeling and experience of what the final thing is going to be like. But actually, from an assessment perspective, it's also an incredibly important opportunity for pupils to receive really diagnostic feedback on how well they are progressing. And following those mock examinations, we have strategically timed parents' evenings, we have grade reports, and we're also really engaging pupils in what they need to do. And then, of course, the final thing is the standardized end-of-year exam. So for all pupils that aren't in year 11 and 13, because, of course, they will be sitting the real thing, they will have been on study leave, they set a standardized end-of-year exam, which, of course, we also will be reporting back to parents. In some ways, in the same way that we always have done, in other ways, in slightly more detail than we ever have done. So just to turn to what the reports actually look like and what's included on them. So the idea is that in any given year, parents and carers receive at least 2, if not 3, formalised reports. In the past, we've issued grade reports every half term, as I've said. We've not done that for a few years, but actually we've also issued one kind of formal open-ended prose report. The new style reports mean that you will actually get slightly more in the way of parental feedback and feedback on pupil progress. But actually the level of detail included in these reports will also be greater than it has been in previous years. The idea is for each report to include a summary of pupil attendance and lateness. Obviously, we know that these things correlate with pupil academic progress. The more they're in school, the more they're attending, the more likely it is that they are going to progress and develop. That's obvious. We also include an accumulation of their sanctions and commendations, so you as the parent can get a good sense of how well they're progressing in terms of their social development, their understanding of school rules, what's holding them back, but also what's to be celebrated as well in the form of those commendations. And then for every single subject, we'll be providing a progress descriptor, a Forest Learner Score, which I'll go into more detail about in a moment, and then for each subject, accompanying specific targets for development. In the past, we've presented that as a very open-ended summary report. And in the past, as I'm sure you know, they have been of mixed quality. They are in all schools. Some focus very much on the characteristics and attributes of the pupil. Such and such is very diligent, such and such is very hardworking. In our view, that doesn't tell you or the child or us much about what it is they need to actually be working on. Now, the best reports were able to distill that information, but the change that we have made to reports means that that information has to be presented. So the way you will see the report will be in the form of strengths and areas for development. So what are they good at within that subject? What is it that they need to improve on? So there's less extraneous comment on such and such is very diligent, and much more on actually in geography, they really need to be working on X, Y, and Z. We hope that will constitute an improvement. We hope that that will give you more ammunition to talk very specifically about what it is that your child needs to do to improve in subjects. The end of year report is largely the same. The only difference is that it includes their performance in their end of year exam. So for pupils that sit end of year exams, particularly those in year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10, and year 12, they will receive an end of year exam result, which will be expressed as a percentage, as it always has been. They will also, which is fairly new, be given a cohort average. So you as the parent can see very quickly, how does your child compare to the average score in that department, in that area? And that will give you, at a glance, a very good sense of how they're achieving. It's a much more useful metric to judge them on than just a decontextualized percentage, because of course, 72% in history may be very good. If you can't benchmark that against something, there's no way you can know. Obviously, 72% in history at first may not sound great, but actually if you hear that the cohort percentage was 67%, then that changes that picture altogether. And that's why we've included that metric. So hopefully at a glance, give parents and carers a much clearer sense of where they are. The other thing that we're including for exam years, so pupils here in year 10 and in year 12, we will be providing an indicative outcome grade, which will be benchmarked against GCSE and A-level examining criteria. So it will be expressed as A star to you at A-level and 9 to 1 at GCSE. And we hope that that gives parents a bit of an anchor. What I would say about that indicative outcome grade, and what I would stress, is that first word, which is the operative word here, indicative. We cannot give a nailed down grade on pupil progress when they're 1 year out of 2 years into the course. I'm sure you can understand that. Also, the end of year exam that they sit at the end of year 10 and the end of year 12 is not by necessity going to be the same as a full examining experience, which they will get in the January mock of year 11 or year 13. It doesn't contain all of the constituent parts. For many pupils in year 12 and in year 10, they've not completed coursework, for example, which for some subjects constitutes up to 50% of the final grade. So to say that we can give you a kind of nailed down grade at that time, obviously would be a false promise. So we want parents to treat that with a bit of nuance, to kind of understand what that is. And at the same time, we hope that it will encourage some reflection and some conversation. As I've said, all of this will be presented very succinctly in an accompanying document on how to read the reports. So pupils in year 7 and 8 will receive a full end of year report, which will actually include, again, all of these developmental points. Pupils in other year groups, year 10, year 12 and year 13, will receive grade reports. As I've already been clear, and this is where things may get a little bit confusing, year 11 and year 13 won't be sitting end of year exams because they're sitting the real thing. So their grade report will be published after the mock exams. That's the last time we really see them to do something really robust and holistic in terms of assessment. Year 10 and year 12 will receive a grade report at the end of the year. The reason why they don't receive a full report at the end of the year is because they also have a parents' evening at that point. We feel that it's really important for those pupils in those examining years, in those really important kind of stages of their education where they're gearing up for their final year of GCSE or their final year of A-level, to actually deliver that feedback as a parents' evening. Other year groups will, of course, also receive parents' evening, but it's just at that specific juncture in the academic year. So year 7 and 8 and eventually year 9, when they migrate onto our new system, will receive a full end of year report. Pupils in year 10 and year 12 will receive a grade report, which is slightly more limited, but will also get a parents' evening at that stage as well. So just to move on ever so slightly, one new thing that we've introduced to the new style reports is a progress descriptor. Now, I've been alluding to the fact that we are removing hard grades from pupils in year 7, 8 and 9, because again, as I've said, there is nothing to benchmark that against. That doesn't mean that we're not going to provide some description of their progress, which may in some respects look a bit like a grade. But of course, this is a much more internal and holistic assessment of their progress. So pupils from year 7 to 13 will be given a progress descriptor when they receive their report. So for English, for science, for computer science, for DT, as well as receiving very clear feedback in terms of strengths and areas for development, they will also be given one of these progress descriptors. And the progress descriptors are quite simple: mastery, secure, emergent, surface, and concerning. So this is the information that will be sent home to parents for pupils in year 7, 8, and 9. For pupils in year 10, 11, 12, and 13, they will receive a progress descriptor, but they will also receive an indicative grade. So for pupils in year 12 and 13, that's A star to E. For pupils in year 10 and 11, that's 9 to 1. So there will still be that indicative grade with all of the nuance and caveats that I've already explained. What we've tried to do is provide these progress descriptors with far more clarity in terms of what they mean than we ever had with the old grading system. So when we used to issue a grade 7 in year 8, it was very hard to actually extrapolate what that meant. Obviously, the higher the better, but it really didn't say much about where they are in their learning. So what we've tried to do for these progress descriptors is really delve deeper into what they say about the learner, what they say about their progress, and actually, importantly, what it says about their next steps. So let's say a student is a mastery student in history. What does that mean? Well, it means that they have achieved consistently at the very highest levels in their common departmental assessments and in their formative ongoing assessments, those week by week, lesson by lesson assessments of progress. They've been doing really well, for example, in topic tests, retrieval practice quizzes and assessments. Learners demonstrate as well a mastery of the curriculum, both in terms of content and skills. So they understand the content of history, for example, but they also have the skills that they need to be excellent historians. They can do source analysis. They can write expert essays. In mathematics, they understand not just trigonometry, but how to apply complex problem solving to unseen questions. In science, they can think like a scientist. They can think in terms of hypothesis testing. They can think in terms of good lab work. They can perform statistical analysis. So it's not just the topic, it's also the skills in that subject. We expect, obviously, learners at that level to excel in public examinations. So that gives you a sense, if they are in year 7 or year 8, what their trajectory might be. We also have, obviously, other bandings. So we have secure, we have emergent, we have surface, and we have concerning. And as I've said before, all of this information will be provided in an easily accessible guide whenever we provide you with a report, so that you can quickly see what it is that pupils need to be working on and what your child needs to be developing, but also what this grade means for that subject. And of course, you are very welcome to get in touch with tutors if you want further contextualization of what this means, for example, in geography, or what this means, for example, in biology or chemistry. I'm just going to give you another example of a progress descriptor. So if we have a look at surface, this is a pupil who, for example, is attaining at a good deal below the expected standard. Learners whose work is regularly awarded kind of inconsistent will fall into this band. They may only be meeting the minority of success criteria in the curriculum, and they perhaps only display superficial or surface level knowledge. Their skills are limited. And we would expect a pupil in this category to go on to secure a low or passing grade in their public examinations. Now, the key thing, as I've said, is that each of these is accompanied with a next step. So what we're looking for parents, carers to engage pupils in, as well as, of course, tutors, the academic leadership team, is if they are flagged as a surface, what do we do next? How do we intervene early? And this column will give you a flavour of some of the interventions that we will already have been putting in place for those pupils. So, for example, if you have a look at emergent, so action and responsibility from the learner supported by intervention, direction and strategies from the school and the family is needed to secure progress. As above, they should reflect on the Forest Learner Framework. They will likely receive increased guidance and support from their subject teachers. What this might look like might be that they have been asked to attend a subject clinic. It might be that they've been given a one-to-one session with one of our deputy heads of section academic to work specifically on study skills, to kind of unlock what's going wrong with those subjects. It might be that they're invited to a lunchtime session with their teacher. It might be that they're set separate, differentiated homework so that they can consolidate the areas of knowledge and skill that they're missing. So that's what that looks like in context. And what I want to reassure parents is those actions are happening as soon as they are labelled. And that is the purpose of the weekly academic leadership team meeting, to get on top of that data and to then share that with all of the stakeholders in the school, including obviously parents and carers when things slip to a point where we need your support. And of course, that will happen very quickly for students. Just a final thing for me to say, as obviously an academically selective school, as an aspirant school, as a school where the vast majority of our pupils don't just do well in public examinations, but excel in public examinations and achieve the very highest grade, our benchmark is really this secure level. We are expecting Forest learners to fall into a minimum, really, of the secure or emergent banding for their subjects. So that's something maybe to think about, and that's very clear in the guide that I've presented, which will accompany the reports. In addition to the progress descriptor, pupils are also given a Forest Learner rating, and this is effectively a 4-star scale. How well are they equipped as learners? So this isn't how good are they at geography, it's how much are they equipped, how much do they have the skills and dispositions to be effective learners. And this very much pulls from what we call our Forest Learner Framework. We believe that if pupils exhibit these traits, if they develop these metacognitive abilities, they will excel as learners. And actually, these aren't just characteristics and dispositions that will make them excellent learners at school. These are the skills, the characteristics, the dispositions that will make them expert at learning throughout their lives. And we believe that those key things are responsibility, direction, strategies, deadlines, and engagement. They effectively do what they say on the tin. With direction, we're looking for a pupil that really understands their feedback. They understand what it is that they need to do to progress within a subject. Strategies, they're actually putting the things in place. They know not just what they need to improve, they know how to improve it. Responsibility, of course, they're taking ownership of their progress. They're taking ownership of the collective progress of the group as well. They're collaborating effectively as learners. And of course, deadlines and engagement, they're meeting deadlines. They are producing homework of high quality. And then, of course, with engagement, they are turning up to lesson well equipped, in the right mindset, in the right mind frame to learn. And effectively, we'll be giving each learner for every single subject a rating of their Forest Learner attributes on a 4-star scale, 1 star being low, 4 stars being high. And again, for parents, I've further extrapolated what that means. What does it mean to have 3-star strategies or 1-star deadlines? That should be fairly clear and fairly obvious, but this, I hope, will mean that it's completely unequivocal. So just to give you an example, a pupil that is given 2 stars for engagement may exhibit the following. They may display a less impressive work ethic or perhaps complacency. They may sometimes be complacent, or they may well be coasting in a subject. They might be disengaged in lessons. They may not fully contribute to discussions or to activities except for when prompted. They infrequently engage in the supercurricular, bits of the subject outside of the lesson, so engaging in readings, engaging in documentaries, engaging in other forms of learning, or they may infrequently engage with or respond to teacher feedback. Whereas a 4-star pupil for engagement, you can imagine, they have an admirable work ethic, they approach the subject with curiosity, openness, and questions. They take the form, this may take the form of extra reading or supercurricular engagement. It may take the form of completion of extension work. They may ask in lessons clarifying or explorative prompt questions, or they may engage with and respond to teacher feedback. So when they receive feedback on work, it doesn't just get filed and put away. They're actually doing something with it. They're responding to questions. They're redrafting work. And what I've done is I've provided an extrapolation of all of those characteristics on that 4-star scale. I've just presented 3 here, but actually in the guide that you will receive when you get the reports, you will have an extrapolation of responsibility, direction, strategies, deadlines, and engagement, and what those 4 stars mean. And this is what it looks like. So this is what your report will look like when you receive it, your child's report. This is actually a real live report from a pupil. I have anonymized it, but it gives you a sense and a flavor of what you might expect. So at the very top, we have their tutor feedback. This is bespoke, it's personal, obviously, to the pupil. It's more about how they're progressing in terms of their personal development, how they're engaging with the pastoral curriculum, how they're engaging with their house, but equally, it's also based on their holistic academic progress. So the tutor will have had eyes on this report for about 2 weeks before it's issued and before they write their comment, which means that they get a very holistic sense of their progress. And of course, they've been looped into all kinds of conversations through the academic leadership team if, for example, deficiencies are spotted. So they are the first to hear that, and they are then the person that activates you, the parent and carer, in that conversation. You can obviously see the second row there, a kind of bit of quantifiable data in terms of the number of detentions, the commendations, the latenesses, and the absences. Below the visual kind of metric we've got here are the number of progress descriptors awarded across the report. So for this pupil, the majority of their subjects, they've received secure bandings. They're not in the mastery banding for any subject yet. That's fine. Mastery is hard to achieve, of course, in a subject. We hope that pupils aspire to that. Sorry, I should recorrect that. They've achieved 2 mastery bandings here, which is excellent. they're emergent in 5 subjects. So as a parent, straight away, I'd be looking at that and thinking, right, those emergent subjects, those surface subjects, thankfully, I think there's only one here, those are the subjects that they really need to focus on developing. And of course, we would want to be moving some of those secure up into the mastery as well. And then for each subject, you will get this report. So you'll obviously have the Forest Learner rating expressed on a 4-star scale. So for this pupil, straight away, I can see that they're meeting deadlines clearly. They've got 3 out of 4 stars there. It might be that they've missed a few homeworks or they're not always consistent with their quality of their homework. Their direction and strategies are sound. Where they're really struggling is perhaps their engagement. And it might mean perhaps that they're not actively contributing to class discussion. They're not engaging collaboratively. And then also they're perhaps not taking full responsibility for their learning. And then for each subject, they will get their strengths, what they're good at, but most pertinently, what do they need to improve on? And because this was issued at the end of the year, you can see there's also an exam results, 68%, and the cohort average, 65% here. So we can see that this pupil has achieved just slightly above average in that subject, but clearly there's work to do. So I hope at a glance, this provides a really good holistic overview of their progress. And like I say, for most year groups, you'll be receiving a report in this detail twice a year. The weird kind of hexagonal thing that you can see on the top right, that is meant to be a map of where their attributes are. So of course, the closer they are to the outer bound, the more developed those attributes are. And that's actually an aggregate, an average of all of their subjects. So we can see this pupil is progressing quite well. On average, they're in a 3 for most of these categories. Deadlines is clearly an area where they're excelling in. They're clearly meeting deadlines. And it might be actually the direction and the strategies that they need to improve a little bit more. And that might provide some extra ammunition for parents' evenings and more things to talk about. Very briefly, just to touch on pupil academic monitoring. I'm not going to read through all of this, but just to give you a flavour of what it is, pupils at Forest get lots of feedback every single lesson in the form of verbal feedback, written feedback, marking of homework, but actually within the lesson, that's the key point to address those misconceptions. What pupils perhaps don't get as much immersion with, and this is a national issue, is actually their own self-reflection. The building of that, what we call metacognitive practice. So we've tried to put structures in place to engage pupils in a self-review of their skills, of their areas for development, very frequently throughout the academic year. And the decision that we've made is actually we want to print their self-review on their report for the first time ever. So pupils' own self-review in their own words, how are they doing in their subjects, will be printed on the report, which I think, and I hope, will provide for fascinating reading for the parent and carer, but also will really, really enhance that dialogue, that dialogic approach to progress reporting. And it will give you a much clearer sense of how they self-perceive their focus. We think this is a vital skill, not just because very good self-reporting is known to boost academic outcomes, but we also know that these are skills for life. Nearly everybody in this chat will have at some point engaged in an appraisal process. These are the kinds of skills of self-reflection, self-review, honesty, thinking of strategies, thinking of smart targets that will pay dividends later down the road. So we're creating much more time for this academic monitoring than we ever have. And we're upping the stakes by printing it on the report as well. So parents can see that captured in the pupil's own words. And I just wanted to provide you with an example from a real Year 10 pupil who engaged in this process last Tuesday. So last Tuesday, period 1 and 2, we collapsed the timetable. We gave that time over to tutors for really in-depth coaching and monitoring conversations. Pupils had access to their reports in advance. They could see what their teachers had said about them. And then we gave them lots of probing questions to reflect on. And it's this that will be actually printed on the report. So again, I'm not going to read through all of this, but I think this reflection is absolutely stunning. And I've not picked this one just because it's a great example. This actually is the kind of level of detail that we're expecting. We're teasing that out of the pupils through these coaching conversations. and we're really monitoring how they're doing it. So just to kind of give you one strand. So which subject do you feel you have made the most progress in this term? What is making you feel this way? I feel that I've progressed the most this year in IGCSE chemistry. I struggled with chemistry a lot throughout last year. I'm pleased to have grasped important key concepts and skills with my own work, dedication. The pupil goes on to talk about the fantastic support they've received from their teacher. They also reflect that they didn't get the highest mark in their last common department assessment. They felt that given the circumstances of being ill, test complications, they did well. But most importantly, they know where to go, how to get there, and to continue making strong progress. If then we kind of switch to a reflection on what they found challenging, you can see how clear they're being here. I found physics really challenging. Concepts and skills have been difficult to grasp. They found it really difficult to apply that to assessments. In their words, they've performed quite blatantly inadequately. Their words, not as. It has been constantly rewarding when I do grasp concepts well. I now revise and frequently consolidate topics which I find difficult in order to progress. I will do this by using physics and maths tutor and continue to do constant practice papers. Physics and Maths Tutor is an online platform that they can use for consolidation and extension, and it's something that we provide to all of our pupils. So I hope that this gives you an example of what we're expecting our pupils to engage with. And obviously, we hope that this process, which we're going to perform at least 3 times a year, gives them a really, really useful framework to self-evaluate. These questions will develop and change as they progress through the years. Every year group has different questions depending on their stage in education. Lower groups, perhaps more questions about transition, for example, in year 7. In year 12, obviously, we're asking them to think about the demands, the complexities of A-level study. But we actually hope that provides a really good framework for their self-evaluation. And they are taking it extremely seriously, which is wonderful. Last few things from me, just to really emphasize this point of it taking a village, this team that is behind the academic reflection, progress and development of every pupil. I've tried quite crudely to express what that actually looks like here, and I've presented it as a bit of a cycle of information and data. We obviously have our subject teachers on the left-hand side. These are the people that know pupils best in terms of their academic progress. They're with them lesson by lesson, day by day. They're providing that in-the-moment feedback, but they're also providing that feedback on the more formalised assessments. They're filling that in once a half term. We, the academic leadership team, are collating that data. We review it week by week. We're involved with conversations with heads of department, with those subject teachers. There's a constant flow of communication there. But equally, we're looping in tutors and heads of house. They're obviously the ones that meet with the pupils every single day, every single morning. They're engaging them with those conversations about their academic progress. They are using the pupil reflections to engage in those high-level conversations, but they're also getting access to the data that we're providing as an academic leadership team, the academic causes for concern that are being flagged by subject teachers. So there's constantly this loop of communication. And then the really important segment of this is you, the parent and carer. We want you to be really reassured that as soon as we spot any issues in regression, as soon as we see a pupil not reaching their potential, we are activating you through conversation. And that shouldn't be waiting until parents' evening, or it shouldn't be when a report is issued. It should be being caught very early. And we will obviously be organising phone conversations. We may be doing this via email. The tutor is always the first port of call here, but they have been in liaison with the subject teachers, with the heads of department and with the academic leadership team. So it really does take a village. It takes all of us communicating all at once. We want parents and carers to be feeding back. We want you to be very much an integral part of this cycle. But we feel that with all of us activated, with all of the data that we're collecting, we can make really informed decisions about early intervention very quickly, and we can make sure that that progress is steering every single conversation that we have, and that it's underscored by robust data. So just to flash these people up on the screen again, we are just one part of this process. We're an important part of it because we're obviously collating the data, we're analysing the data, we're looking at it week by week, but we are then feeding into tutors, to heads of house, to subject teachers, and they are the ones doing the work on the ground. Obviously, our deputy heads of section as well, Mr. Peters, Miss Mackey and Mr. Sage, are also meeting with pupils one-to-one. And indeed, I will have those higher level conversations with pupils as well when they are progressing through our interventions. And let's say those interventions are not working. It's triaged through those systems, heads of section, Miss Wright and myself. So just a few frequently asked questions to finish with. Hopefully these are things that I've anticipated that you may still have on your minds. There's a lot of moving parts in this. I obviously know that this is quite a complex system. It has to be, because obviously progress and academic outcomes, they are very complex things. Teaching and acquiring new knowledge and skills, this is a really, really difficult thing to grasp. So will we receive grades every half term? The answer to that is no, but pupils will continue to sit assessments every half term in each of their subjects, the common departmental assessments. These are closely monitored, they're logged, they're evaluated within departments and across the academic leadership team. As I've alluded to, we meet once per week. Departments meet once per week. We are providing them with the data to have those conversations. So when there are issues, when there is regression, that is being flagged early, and then that's activating all of our systems, our wraparound support here, as I've tried to quite crudely outline. And of course, you will be activated as soon as we spot those areas of regression. And of course, also those areas where pupils are coasting, they're not reaching their ability. Maybe that they're performing adequately, but we know they could be achieving mastery, they could be achieving A star, they could be achieving grade 9. So we're also activating those conversations too. So how often will we receive grades and reports? In year 7, 8 and 9, like I've said, we will not report grades, but we will report progress descriptions, so mastery secure. There are no grades in Key Stage 3. There never have been. It's been an extrapolation. I think it's been a poor one. I think it's engendered false equivalencies. So in Key Stage 3, we will not be providing grades, but we will be giving you that description of progress. And of course, at the end of the year, you will also, of course, get their performance in their assessments. Their big end of year exams will be providing you with the percentage, the cohort percentage. But we hope all of this gives you more than enough information to understand how well they are doing in their subjects, which at the end of the day is what we're looking to really convey. And of course, what they need to do to improve. In years 10, 11, 12 and 13, parents and carers will receive grades at the following junctures. So the interim report, they will get a progress descriptor, but they will also get an indicative grade benchmarked against GCSE and A-level outcomes. In the January mock exam, they will get their performance in that mock exam, but they will also get an indicative grade, like I said. In the Trinity mock exam for year 13, they will get a grade. And at the end of year exam, they will not just get the percentage, they will also get a grade. Just to really re-emphasize, the reason why we're not providing grades in 7, 8 and 9 is because grades do not exist for 7, 8 and 9. There is no external grading mechanism. It is a complete extrapolation. For those other year groups, 10, 11, 12 and 13, we do have external gradings. And I hope that the progress descriptors do give you an indication of how well they are performing and what they're likely to go on to achieve if they continue to progress at that rate. So how will we find out if our child is struggling in between reports and parents' evenings? So as I've tried to make clear, you will be contacted in between reports if we feel that your child is regressing or struggling. Our academic leadership team, heads of department, heads of house, tutors and teachers meet continuously to monitor and evaluate your child's progress. We are meeting week by week, lesson by lesson. We don't just look at high-level regression, i.e. concerning grades. We also monitor deviation against baseline performance, those chem monitoring assessments at the beginning of the year. But we also look at pupil voice. If a pupil comes to us and says, I'm really not getting this in mathematics, or I'm struggling with English, of course we triage that. We initiate those conversations, we bring parents in on that, and we speak to the relevant parties. Tutors, teachers, heads of house, heads of department have internal systems which trigger, and parents are brought into the conversation quickly. I hope I've reassured you of that. And obviously, parents' evenings and reports have been logically spaced throughout the year, so there should not be a term that goes by without a parent-teacher interaction, either through a report, a parents' engagement event, or a parents' evening. But of course, Do also feel free to pick up the phone to tutors. They will be able to triage any questions you have, to activate the relevant parties to feedback to heads of department and teachers. If you have subject-specific inquiries, that's perfectly legitimate. We want you to be engaged and involved in your child's education, of course. So how many reports will we receive per year? You will receive at least 2 formal reports, 3 for year 13 and year 11 from September next year. An interim report will be published. Year 9 and year 11 are still on our old system. They will go into our new system next year. Year 13 are actually in our new system, so they will get 3 this year. Year 11 will be on our legacy system this year, and we're phasing that into them just to help with that change management. So you will get an interim report. This will be issued between December and February. It will contain all of that information that I've said before. You'll get an end of year report for year 7, 8 and 9 following their exam. For years 10 and 12, you'll get an end of year grade report. So it won't contain all of the commentary from the subjects, because instead there's a parents' evening at that juncture. That's been very deliberately timed there because of where they are in their transitional point at GCSE and A-level. I hope I've made that clear. There's a mock grade report, of course, that's issued just after the January mocks and also the April mocks for year 13. And then pupils in year 10 and 12 will also receive a separate HPQ and EPQ report, which informs parents about their progress in that area. And then in terms of parents' evenings arrangements have not changed as a result of these developments. So same number of parents' evenings, same format. Most year groups have 1 parents' evening and 1 parent engagement event, but pupils in year 12 have 2 to support the transition to A-level study. So there's 1 right at the beginning of the year, and of course there's 1, as I've said earlier, after those end of year exams, just like year 10. However, I do want to make parents aware that we will shortly be canvassing parent opinion and gathering thoughts and feedback about our current parents' evening format. I know there are lots of views out there. For some people, they really like the shift to online parents' evening. It gives you flexibility. It means that you can coincide that with work priorities. It obviously cuts down on travel. It's more sustainable in some ways. Some parents feel very strongly about the in-person event. Schools are all across the country offering mixed practice. There's no one panacea here. But one thing that we do want to do is obviously involve you in those conversations and consultations as we look to refine parents' evening going forward. So I do apologise for the sheer amount of information there. I hope it has provided some clarity. Like I say, I will be issuing, obviously, whenever a report goes out, a full guide to the reports, which will hopefully be succinct, but also something that you can continuously refer back to. I hope that makes sense of the reports. I hope it means that you know where to go when you don't know where to go, who to ask questions of. But I also hope it reassures parents that, obviously, assessment and reporting are areas of forest provision that we take extremely seriously. The evolution, the changes that we've made, we believe are strengthening changes. They're not a reduction in quality. They're certainly not a reduction, I think, in workload. What they are, I hope, is a rationalization of our procedures and our processes. And I hope it does provide parents with more information. As you can see, there is a QR code on the screen now. Please do feel free to provide feedback on the session, to ask follow-up questions, and do feedback to us. We're always looking to refine our provision. So thank you all very much for your time this evening. I hope that was in some way helpful, and please do feedback to us and keep conversing with us. We want to work with parents as closely as possible. So thank you all. Good.